Boris Becker owned some of the most famous trophies in tennis, and when a British court asked him to hand them over, he said he did not know where they all were. That answer became the story everyone remembered. The champion who lost his own trophies. But it is not why he went to prison. The trophies were the headline. The real reason was quieter, and it lived inside a bank account. In April 2022, at Southwark Crown Court in London, the youngest man ever to win Wimbledon was convicted of hiding money. Not for the missing silverware. On those charges, the jury cleared him. He was sent to prison for what he did after the law had already told him he had nothing left. He was 17 when he won Wimbledon in 1985. Unseated. A red-haired teenager throwing himself across the grass, and by nightfall the most famous athlete in Germany. He won it again the next year. 6 Grand Slam titles before he turned 30. The prize money ran to tens of millions. The endorsements ran to more. For a stretch of the 1980s and 90s, Boris Becker was one of the richest sportsmen alive. The scale of what had come and gone was staggering. Over a glittering career and a lucrative retirement, Becker was estimated, by some accounts, to have earned more than $50 million. Prize money, sponsorships, television deals, appearances. And yet by 2017 it was gone, swallowed by 2 divorces, child support, taxes, failed investments, and a standard of living he never once adjusted downward. The London Bank was simply the first creditor powerful enough to force the reckoning. Here is the first thing the record quietly shows about people and money. The fortune that arrives fastest is the fortune hardest to imagine ending. Becker earned his as a boy. And he spent the rest of his life as if that boy would simply keep earning it forever. There had been a warning, years before. In 2002, a court in Munich handed Becker a suspended sentence and a heavy fine for tax evasion. He had claimed to live in Monaco while actually residing in Germany. He kept his freedom. He kept his place in public life, a beloved commentator at the very tournament he had once conquered. The lesson, if there was one, did not take. When the world keeps forgiving you, you can start to believe the rules themselves are negotiable. The bill came due in 2017. A private London bank, Arbuthnot Latham, was owed more than £3 million on a loan tied to a sprawling, half-finished estate in Mallorca. Becker could not pay it. And on the 21st of June, 2017, a court declared him bankrupt. Bankruptcy is not a punishment. It is a bargain. The law wipes your debts clean, but in exchange, almost everything you own now belongs to your creditors, and you must tell the truth about all of it. Every account, every property, every share, every loan. That is the entire deal. Disclose, and you are forgiven. Conceal, and it stops being debt and becomes a crime. Boris Becker concealed. In the months after he was declared bankrupt, money began moving out of his business account. Around £390,000 flowed out to other accounts, including ones belonging to his ex-wife and his estranged wife. Money that, in the eyes of the law, was no longer his to move. He did not declare a property he still owned in Les Mis, the German town where he grew up. He did not disclose a bank loan of hundreds of thousands of euros. He did not reveal tens of thousands of shares he held in a technology company. Each of these was an asset. Each now belonged to the people he owed, and each of them stayed hidden. This is the second thing the record shows. A man does not usually decide, in one clean moment, to become dishonest. He slides there, one transfer that feels justified, one asset that feels personal, one omission that feels like it hardly counts. Becker did not see a fraud. He saw his own money, his own house, his own family to protect. The law saw something with a much colder name. Becker did not go quietly into bankruptcy. In 2018, his lawyers made an extraordinary claim that he could not be pursued at all because he held diplomatic immunity, serving, they said, as a sports and cultural attaché for the Central African Republic. It was the kind of move only a man convinced of his own exception would even attempt. The Central African Republic's own government cut it down, saying the diplomatic passport he carried was one of a batch that had been stolen, and was not valid. The immunity claim collapsed. The bankruptcy ground on. When it finally reached trial in the spring of 2022, Becker took the witness stand in his own defense. He told the jury he had cooperated. He said he had leaned on a whole apparatus of advisors, lawyers, and accountants, and had trusted them to handle it. He said the lifestyle had crushed him, school fees, maintenance owed to two separate families, the mortgage on a house he could no longer afford. He had acted on advice, he insisted. Not out of dishonesty. It is a defense that surfaces again and again when the successful fall. The money was handled by other people, the paperwork was somebody else's job, the numbers were simply too big to follow. Sometimes it is even true. But the law draws a hard line between not understanding your finances and choosing not to look. The jury had to decide which side of that line Boris Becker had been standing on. The prosecutor, Rebecca Chowkley, told the jury it was far simpler than that. Becker, she said, had acted deliberately and dishonestly. He knew exactly what he owned. He knew exactly what the law demanded of him. And he moved the money regardless. And the trophies, the detail the whole world latched onto. This is where the public story and the court record split apart. Becker had been charged, among some 24 counts, with concealing his tennis trophies and medals, Wimbledon titles, and Olympic gold, the physical proof of everything he had been. It made for an irresistible headline, the champion who mislaid his own glory rather than surrender it to his creditors. But on those counts, the jury was not convinced. On the trophies, Boris Becker was acquitted. There was a bitter irony folded into the trophy charge. 2 years earlier, in 2019, some of Becker's memorabilia had already gone under the hammer at a London auction, trophies and keepsakes sold off to chip away at the debt. He had, in part, surrendered his own history willingly. So when prosecutors alleged he was still hiding others, the picture was murkier than the headline let on, and the jury, having heard all of it, would not convict him on that count. On 4 other counts, he was not. He was convicted of removing property, those money transfers out of his account, of failing to disclose the house in Germany, of concealing the loan, of hiding the shares, for findings of guilt, and every single one of them was about money. None of them about silverware. Under the Insolvency Act, that is precisely the crime, not going broke, but lying about it afterward. Bankruptcy is legal. Concealment is not. Becker had crossed the one line that turns plain misfortune into a prison sentence. He had faced around 24 charges in total. On most of them, the jury found him not guilty. This was not a man convicted of everything the prosecution had thrown at him. It was a man convicted of 4 specific, provable acts of concealment. And that distinction matters, because it is exactly the part the public let fall away. That is the gap this whole case lives inside. The public remembers a man who hid his trophies. The record shows a man cleared of exactly that, and convicted instead of the far less romantic act of moving cash he had sworn was gone. The story people tell is almost never the story the transcript tells. The crowd wants a symbol. The court only deals in accounts. 3 weeks later, Becker returned to Southwark to be sentenced. Judge Deborah Taylor sent him to prison for 2.5 years. She told him he had shown no remorse and no humility, that he had tried to distance himself from his own offending, as if it had happened to someone else. She acknowledged the fall itself was a punishment, the humiliation, the wreckage of a reputation built over 40 years. But that, she said, did not excuse what he had done. And so the boy who had won Wimbledon at 17 was led down to a cell at 54. He served the first stretch in Wandsworth, one of the oldest and most overcrowded prisons in England, then was moved to a facility for foreign nationals. In December 2022, after roughly 8 months inside, he was released and deported to Germany, barred from returning to the country where he had first become a legend. And it was all breathtakingly public. This was no anonymous businessman. Becker had spent his retirement as one of the most familiar voices in tennis, sitting in the commentary box at the tournament that made him, the nation that had watched him win now watching him fall. Few humiliations are as complete as being undone in front of the very audience that once adored you. Here is the last thing the record leaves behind. Becker did not go broke because he was stupid. He was disciplined enough to win the biggest titles in his sport as a teenager. He went broke, and then to prison, because somewhere along the way he stopped believing the ordinary rules applied to him, the rule that money runs out, the rule that a court order means exactly what it says. Talent had bent the world to him once. He seemed to assume it always would. So watch what he actually chose, when everything was gone. He did not fight hardest to keep his trophies, the record shows he let those go. He fought to keep the cash, quietly, in accounts he thought no one would trace. When the story ends and only the truth is left, people don't cling to the symbols of who they were. They cling to the money. Ask yourself which one you'd reach for, the trophy on the shelf, or the account no one can see. Follow for more.